your voice is fine.
Oh, okay. So, I want to thank anyone for tuning in tonight. I was asked to talk about Srila Prabhupada in India, part 2. I gave a talk some weeks ago on Srila Prabhupada in India, and this is a continuation. Of course, Srila Prabhupada started in India. He grew up there, born in Calcutta. And he was instructed by his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, to preach in the Western countries. So that instruction was given to Srila Prabhupada at the first meeting that they had in 1922. Okay, that's about 98 years ago. But since he had recently married, he was unable to actually carry it out. So for so many years, as a householder, Srila Prabhupada never forgot that instruction. And he always meditated on it. It just, as life went on, it was just not time for it to happen. So in 1965, in the intervening years, Srila Prabhupada had written 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam. He had also translated Bhagavad Gita, but the manuscript was stolen. So Srila Prabhupada left India with a few trunks of his Srimad Bhagavatams and about 40 rupees in his pocket. Practically no money. And a free passage on a steamship, hardly bigger than a tuna boat, very small freighter. So on the journey over to America, he had 2 heart attacks, almost died. And when he arrived in America, the only accommodation he had was from someone who agreed to sponsor him in Butler, Pennsylvania. So in 1965, he arrived in Boston Harbor, and then was bused down to Pennsylvania. He spent a few weeks there. And then he moved to New York. How you moved to New York without any money, I don't know. But somehow he was living on the Bowery with the bums and the drunks and the ne'er-do-wells and the drugged out hippies and pretty much the dregs of American society. So after a year or so, after a lot of disappointment, some discouragement, he started getting some followers. And then gradually he sent some of his followers to the West Coast in San Francisco. They started the temple in San Francisco. Another devotee went to Los Angeles. Other devotees were in Albuquerque. And some went to Montreal and Toronto and other places. And gradually the movement began to expand. So in 1967, I was recently reading this Leela Amrita. This is the Swarup Prabhupada Leela during his, from the time that he came to America. And even there's a volume he wrote chronicling what happened before he came to America. So in 1967, Srila Prabhupada's health had started to seriously deteriorate. 1967. And so, unfortunately, he had to leave and go back to India to regain his health. So, in 1967, he went with Kirtanananda, and Kirtanananda later took sannyas in Vrindavan, and Janmashtami, and also Achyutananda. Both of them were from New York. Later on, they were joined by Ramanuja, who had joined in San Francisco. So at that time, Srila Prabhupada didn't have any temples there. He certainly knew a lot of people and friends that he knew, business associates, his godbrothers, family, and so on. But he didn't have any temples there. So, as Srila Prabhupada is undaunted, so he was trying to find out, some way that he could get a foothold to have some of his own temples in India. And if you read this volume 3 of the Lilamrita, only he could lead them. There was one godbrother, Bal Maharaj. The Gaudiya Math by that time, in 1967, had broken up practically after the disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. The Gaudiya Math pretty much splintered into so many independent temples rather than as a unified movement. So Bal Maharaj was one of his godbrothers, and he had a school of Oriental philosophy. And he offered that Srila Prabhupada's disciples could come there and study Sanskrit and some of the Vaishnava literatures. And so they went there to Mathura, where the school was. And as it happened, it wasn't all that they had expected. The school was very mundane. The people there were not at all like what they were expected. They expected that all the Indians that they would meet in India would be like Prabhupada. Well, they weren't. This is the thing. In India, the situation is very much different than in the Western countries because of the Indian culture and because of the degradation of the ancient culture. So, unfortunately, in this particular circumstance, it wasn't favorable for them to stay at Bal Maharaj's temple. And Srila Prabhupada said that, well, they could stay at the Radha Damodar and, bicycle over there. But as it turned out, they just, Achyutananda and Kirtananda, they didn't like the situation there. So, Prabhupada moved around here and there because he had a place in Chipawada, which is where Srila Prabhupada used to translate and print the Srimad Bhagavatam. This was in a suburb of Delhi. So he had accommodations there. He also had some arrangement in Vrindavan. And the devotees there met some of the Goswamis in the Radha Damodar temple and other temples there. The Goswamis have descended from the original pujaris. These temples were established by the 6 Goswamis. They're just direct disciples of Lord Chaitanya. And so their descendants, they engaged some householders in taking care of the deities there. And so these people who own the temples now are their descendants. And if you go to some of the temples in Vrindavan, you see there's many different deities. Why are there so many deities? Well, what happened was they consolidated, they sold off some of the temples, and they put all the deities together. And that's why you find in many temples of Vrindavan, there are many different sets of deities. So in the course of time, and especially in the Kali Yuga, everything becomes degraded. Things become disordered, go downhill. This is the natural tendency. So unfortunately, the devotees were very shocked to see, find out that many of these people are chewing pan, which is an intoxicant, smoking, bidi, doing all kinds of things that, according to Srila Prabhupada, should not be done. But they own these temples in Vrindavan. and they're Rajbasis. So India, for a Westerner, if you've never been there, and grew up, just like myself, I grew up in Los Angeles area, in a pretty idyllic town. And my first entrance into India in 1972 was a great shock, to say the least. Of course, when I grew up, sometimes we'd go to the desert. My father would go fishing or something in the Sierras. But I've never felt such heat and humidity in my life, landing in Bombay in May of 1972. And to see the way people live and in a third world country, never seen such things. So in India, Prabhupada's disciples had a hard time. In my case, there were 10 of us that came to India in 1972, and it didn't take more than a day for every single person, except for me. It took me 3 days. Everyone got sick. And especially in some Indian cities or towns, the water is very scanty. So in the afternoon, you would have to gather some pots and go down to where the spigot was and get in line to fill up your pots. And that was from like maybe 4:30 to about maybe an hour, hour and a half. That's the only time the water would be on. Okay. And it's not like, like you hook up a hose and you wash your car, there's so much pressure. To fill a gallon container might take maybe a minute or two. It's like when you fill up your car, if the gas station is near empty, it takes a long time to fill your tank. So you have all the villagers gathered around, and then you can't drink the water. It's okay. All right. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada wanted his disciples to come to India to experience the Indian culture. And so I had joined in Los Angeles in February 1972. And a few months later, I found myself in Fresno, working with the devotee Bhutatma and some other devotees. We were on traveling SanDiego in Sacramento, and we got a call from Karandar in Los Angeles that Prabhupada wanted 50 devotees to go to India to help build temples. So they were closing all these small centers like Fresno and Sacramento and Santa Barbara. There were very few devotees there, so they selected 10 of us to go to India. So we collected some money, pooled the money, and somehow made our way to India. So we arrived in May. So the idea was that we're going to establish temples specifically for the Westerners to come and have accommodation so they could experience the Holy Dham in Vrindavan and also in Mayapur. And another temple in Bombay, in Juhu Beach. So this is where I landed, and we went to Juhu Beach. If you know anything about SanDiego, just imagine La Jolla Shores back in the 1940s, 1930s. Practically no one there. There were probably some hotels or whatever. But location. Okay, so this Juhu Beach area was like the La Jolla Shores of Bombay, right? So a very good tract of land. And one Indian gentleman, Mr. Nair, was offering it for a very low price. And Srila Prabhupada had seen this property before he came to America. He was going to visit Sumati Maraji, who owned a steamship line. And Prabhupada begged her for a ticket to America on her steamship. And so while he was there, he spied this piece of land, which was available. And he made a determination that I want this land. Now, if you understand Srila Prabhupada, you understand one thing about Prabhupada. Whatever he wanted, Krishna arranged that he would get. So Prabhupada wanted this piece of land to put a temple. Okay. So just like when you have an undeveloped area, especially down near the beach, it attracts all kinds of ne'er-do-wells, riffraff, so on and so on. And it's undeveloped, and there were people living on this piece of land in the back. There were some apartment buildings, kind of arranged in a kind of a semicircle. And on this piece of land, very inexpensive, and at some point, I believe in 1971, there's one of those flying dates right there. We've imported them. Anyway, so they put a down payment with Mr. Nair. And Srila Prabhupada is not an ordinary person. When we think of, a man, he's a man, I'm a man, we're all the same. You have your opinion, I have mine. We're basically just men or women or whatever. Okay. So when you have someone like Srila Prabhupada, we don't refer to him as a man. As our spiritual master, he is a personality. But when we think of man, we think of the body, right? Here's a man, here's a woman, here's a cockroach, here's a bird or a tree or whatever. But within the body is the spiritual being. And someone who is fully realized, okay, they're not the body. So we can't refer to them as a man. It's actually kind of offensive. So Srila Prabhupada, as a pure devotee, has the ability to see past, present, and future. He knows what's going to happen. Okay. He's in direct touch with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he's not an ordinary person. If you ask a Christian, well, is Jesus like anybody else? Oh, no. They believe he's God. Or some of them do. And I'm not putting them down because what's the harm? Right? We don't believe that Jesus was himself the Godhead. But he was on the same level. So in another sense, as good as God. Okay. So there's a distinction. Yes, he's a different person, but on the same level. And in the same way, we see Srila Prabhupada on the same level as Krishna, but not Krishna. Okay. When we read Bhagavad Gita, okay, Arjuna is Krishna's friend. Okay. Krishna made him start the new parampara because it had been lost. So Bhagavad Gita, as Krishna explained, you were there when I spoke Bhagavad Gita millions of years ago. And Arjuna said, wait. That was millions of years ago. And Krishna said, yes, you were there, but I don't forget. But you have forgotten. Okay. So the same knowledge that Krishna spoke to the sun god millions of years ago, the same knowledge Krishna was teaching Arjuna. Okay. So Srila Prabhupada is on the same level as Arjuna. And in fact, there's, in terms of spiritual personalities, okay, in one sense, there are different relationships. Some might have a relationship with a conjugal relationship, or maybe Krishna's friends, or maybe Krishna's parents, or maybe Krishna has some servants. Each has a different flavor, a different kind of relationship with Krishna, but they're all transcendental. And so it's not that if you have some relationship that's more, exalted, that this person's a better devotee or whatever. It's not like that. So in terms of Srila Prabhupada, there are many Vaishnavas, many wonderful Vaishnavas. Prabhupada's godbrothers were wonderful Vaishnavas. But amongst his godbrothers, he was able to achieve hundreds and thousands of times more than them. And in fact, his level of faith and his purity far surpassed theirs. But it's not for us to judge or to speak ill of them, because practically speaking, they're on the same level, and they're all going back to God. So Srila Prabhupada wanted to establish these temples in India. But when they went to India in 1967, 1968, many of his godbrothers were very glad, nice Westerners, we can, gin up our membership by, getting Swami Bhaktivedanta's disciples to come and join our organization, right? And they're very keen to try to lure, especially Chudananda and some of the other devotees, because Kirtananda, very shortly after he took sannyas, went back to the West. So Chudananda, hey man, Hare Krishna, a little cockroach. Hey, no, they can't climb up my butt. No. I scared them away. Anyway, so Chudananda was in India, and he helped Srila Prabhupada find the land in Mayapur. Prabhupada didn't have any land there, so Chudananda was staying at some of his godbrothers' ashrams. But unfortunately, they tried to lure him away because they wanted the prize, right? When you have out in the jungle, if the lion catches some prey, right, and the jackals come and they try to steal away the prey from the lion, right? So unfortunately, some of Prabhupada's godbrothers thought that it would be very good if they could get these Western disciples to join their mosques. Okay, so these are some of the difficulties that Srila Prabhupada found. Not that he was unaware of it, but that these things didn't work out so well in the beginning. So anyway, so this tract of land in Bombay, in Juhu Beach, Prabhupada wanted this land. And when we were able to give a down payment, Prabhupada wanted devotees to live on the land. Well, if you understand what happens in India, there are so many people. If you have some homeless family or some low class, if you own a palace and overnight some people come and build a lean-to on the side of your house or somewhere on your land, you can't drive them away. It's illegal. They have to be somewhere. Okay. So Prabhupada knew that if we stay on the land, Mr. Nair can't drive us away. Prabhupada knew exactly what Mr. Nair's plan was. So if you know anything about what happened in the Juhu property, Mr. Nair had previously swindled at least a couple of other people out of that same tract of land. He was an attorney. So he made some plan. He would get the down payment and then through some legal maneuvering would drive them away and keep the down payment. So it was a kind of a scam. Okay. But Prabhupada knew the whole thing because Srila Prabhupada was not under any illusion. You could not fool Srila Prabhupada. Period. End of statement. There was no way that you could pull a fast one. You can ask some of my godbrothers who tried. Prabhupada knew everything. He was certainly aware of what Mr. Nair was up to. But we didn't. And so, it's just like, someone is shady, right? So you kind of have to be a little savvy, a little bit clever if you want to manipulate that, right? You have to sort of go along with it, right? So when we got this land, at a certain point, because we were living on the land, and we built a temporary temple. This room is probably, let's see, 20 feet by 20 feet. I think the temporary temple that we built was maybe just a little bigger than this, and the deity room was about 1/4. Very small, kind of a shed, like a backyard shed. That's about how big the deity room was, where the deities were. Okay, so all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, actually, I don't know the exact time of day, but anyway, these men showed up and started tearing down the temple. And they had a concrete area for kirtan, which was kind of raised up a few feet. It was kind of off the ground because it's near the ocean, and sometimes there's a lot of rain, so you build it up a few feet so that it can't get flooded. So they came and started jackhammering the floor, and they started tearing. We had a corrugated roof. It was all open. There was no sides except on the deity house, and kind of a pondal, a hard roof, corrugated roof. And they started, tearing down the roof and jackhammering the floor and everything. And some of the one local lady stood in front of the deity house, in front of the deity doors. And she said, "You're not going to touch the deities. If you're going to try to tear down this door, you'll have to kill me first." Okay, and there were some other people there. They showed up with guns, and they stopped the tear down. So anyway, there were many, many obstacles. So in India, a very, very different place, and Srila Prabhupada did things differently there. He personally took charge of most of the projects. Okay, in America, because there were devotees had some experience with building, or they had experience with working in the West. But in India, Prabhupada knew that there are many, many envious people. And there are many, many, many different kinds of religious teachings and followers and so on and so on. So you've got, on one hand, Mayavadis who say, it's all one. And then you have your Buddhists over here, and they say, no, there's no God. There's nothing, right? And then you have, Vaishnavas, but then under the guise of Vaishnavas, you have people who are Sahajiyas, who take everything cheaply, right? And they have imitating Krishna, having rasa dance, keeping women, even though they're supposed to have renounced women. They go to Vrindavan and they have so many women followers, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of pushing and shoving, so to speak, different factions and groups, all under the name of religion, right? And people like I was describing, that when devotees went there for the first time in India, they thought everyone was like Prabhupada. Oh, wait a minute, they're smoking, they're doing this, they're doing that, it's all mundane. Well, who are these people? Well, what's going on here? Okay, so a totally different atmosphere in India. Now, just for example, if your mother tells you, no, don't do that, okay, so it's wrong, you shouldn't do it, right? But when she's not there, you do it anyway. Or sometimes the kids are just rebellious. I'm not going to listen to you, right? I saw it in my own family, right? My little brother was cut up, right? So if you know something's wrong and you do it anyway, oh man, you get the book thrown at you, okay? If you didn't know and you did something wrong, well, okay, a little slap on the wrist, don't do it, okay? So in India, they know they're not supposed to smoke. They know they're not supposed to drink. They know they're not supposed to eat meat, okay? But in the Vedas, there is some adjustment for people who want to do these things. Okay, and for eating meat, the instruction is that you can offer not a cow, but like a lesser animal, like a goat or whatever. Okay, and there's a ceremony, and if you perform this ceremony, one of the mantras that you chant into the ear of the animal that you're going to slaughter, you're going to say to that animal, I am killing you now, but in the future, you will have the opportunity to do the same to me. This is the this is the whole point. In religious instruction, okay, it's not wanton sense gratification or wanton enjoyment, oh Lord, won't you buy me a color TV, right? Or a Mercedes Benz or whatever, thank you, Jesus, I'm now rich. This is not what we should be asking God. Okay. But some people take religion to be like that. And if I'm wealthy, well, I guess my religion is perfect, right? And the proof is that once you get your wealth, well, we don't need any God or anything, right? We got what we wanted. We use God as a means to get what we want. The order supplier, like a God in the box, right? You drive in, right? I'll take an order of color TV, and of course the Mercedes Benz, and a few lottery tickets on the side. Okay, you drive up. Sorry, the Mercedes Benz are all out of stock, so we'll have to substitute a Yugo. Sorry, you got bad karma. So this is what unfortunately goes on in India. We have so many different religious groups and so many people pulling and shoving. Where's the real religion? Srila Prabhupada took to the Western countries intact the Vedic civilization, the original pure Vedic civilization of pure Krishna Bhakti to the West. Can you imagine? No one on earth besides Srila Prabhupada could even conceive of it. His god brothers absolutely had no understanding. They thought that Lord Chaitanya's prediction of every town and village, well, that's just, that's just some kind of a, wishful thinking, maybe, it can happen someday. And Prabhupada came to America at the age of 70. I'm 69. Okay. Going to a foreign country with no money, by oneself, no help, not only no help, all kinds of discouragement. Okay. And in 12 years established Hare Krishna as a household word. Over 100 temples, farming communities, schools, 10,000 disciples. Can you imagine? Lord Jesus had maybe a dozen, and Prabhupada had 10,000. Now, a lot of that credit also goes to his early disciples who spread to different towns and villages around the world. But Srila Prabhupada personally, single-handedly, just like a puppet master, he was able to establish Krishna consciousness practically on every single continent in the world. Unbelievable. But in India, he had his own ideas and the way he wanted to spread Krishna consciousness. For example, in the West, we have all this Harinam, going and chanting on the street with and playing kartals and singing and chanting on the corners and distributing literature. Prabhupada didn't do that in India. He said, we should not do that. Why? Because there are people in India who also have kirtan, and they're not well respected. They're known as Sahaja. So we don't want to be lumped in with them. So he began a life membership program. Okay, it was a very important and very powerful program of getting people involved. Okay, for at that time it was 1,111 rupees. For that, you would get all of Prabhupada's books, and if you traveled to other countries, you could stay for a few days for free in any of the temples. Okay, that was the promise. Okay, but Srila Prabhupada's idea wasn't that that's the only time you're gonna, hit them up for money, right? That they would become, regular donors. Okay, so back in 1972, when I arrived in Bombay, they were trying to make life members, right? And in spite of the heat, in spite of all the difficulties, we had no money. And I'm talking about we were eating grains that the grain dealers couldn't sell because they were so worm-eaten, right, or cracked. If you know what, chipped rice, right? There's a preparation called chipped rice. Okay, if you know what chipped rice is, I know what chipped rice is. The grains are broken. It's just when you filter out the whole grains, you have the chipped rice, which is left. That's what we ate. When you made the dal, okay, you boil the beans, and as it's boiling, there's some froth that comes to the top. You skim off the froth with all the bugs that floated to the top. That's what we ate. Okay. The chapati flour, again, all the grains that we would get donated because we didn't have any money. There was about 2 or 3 dozen devotees living in Bombay. And at the end of the day, when he came back, they had made one small pot of sabji for the deities. And so they get like a thimble full of, Mahaprasad. Anyway, it was very, very austere. And making a life member was like pulling teeth. I don't know how they survived. I was only there for about 9 months. But Giriraj and later on Sridhar Swami and some other devotees, they managed to build this amazing temple. I visited there 3 years ago. I had not been back since 1973. And so this is 2017. I went with Yudhishthira, and I managed to visit the temple. I found out that land is the most valuable land on the planet. How is that possible? It's India. Yeah, it's India. That land is the most expensive real estate on the planet. There are high rises sprouting up everywhere. I didn't even recognize where I was. Unbelievable. And beautiful, beautiful deities. They have a theater, they have a twin high-rise guest house, they have a school. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So Prabhupada's program was life membership. At a certain point, some of the Bollywood stars would sit at the membership table. Suppose you had Robert Redford or, bigger superstar. He's sitting at a table in front of the temple. Do you think people might be attracted to come and become a life member? So people showed up in droves. They started turning people away. Well, you're not worthy of being a member. Compare that to what it was in 1972 when if you made a member, then we had some money we could eat. That's the way it was. Okay, so my full dandavats from now to the end of eternity to Giriraj Maharaj. At the time when I arrived there was so much criticism of him. Oh, he doesn't know how to run a temple. He's incompetent. He doesn't know anything, right? It was crazy. But after so many years, it didn't take that long. It took a few years. He built that temple, and then stayed there for another 20 years. And the the saga is unbelievable. He's writing a memoir or something. So, Srila Prabhupada in India, an amazing saga. He was able to visit heads of state. In India, if you go to a business, right, you can finagle your way into the boardroom. You can see the CEO of the biggest corporations in India. Try that in America. I don't think so, right? When I go visit Mr. Bezos from Amazon, I don't think so. But in India, you can. And he was able to, I think he met with Indira Gandhi, and other devotees have had, even Mr. Modi, who's currently the leader of India, very respectful. So there have been great inroads made in India. But the fact is that Srila Prabhupada was very careful about how he dealt with things in India. There's a lot of cheating, to the construction materials. When I was in Mayapur in 1990, we were building the Samadhi. And there were some of the workers, they would steal anything they could get their hands on. Nails, wire, especially copper wire. They'd throw it over the fence when you weren't looking and come back and collect it later. You have to keep everything under control. Concrete, it's like gold. Okay, if you want concrete, good luck. It's rationed, right? And you have to bribe people to get things done. It is like standing in a vat of concrete. Push a string. You can pull a string, but push a string, it's like trying to get something done in India. It's impossible, almost. And Srila Prabhupada was very keen. When they built the buildings in Mayapur, Prabhupada would go around on a morning walk and inspect everything. And they could look up on the roof and see that the devotees had strung some rope. And they tied it around the edge of the building. In buildings in India, they use the roof, put a little extra brick and build it up about waist high. Right, so you can walk around and you can do things on the roof. Okay, so the devotees had rigged a rope that went over the edge of the building, but it's stucco or something, and the rope was digging into the edge of the roofing there and deteriorating the edge. And Prabhupada saw that and he was very upset. Prabhupada saw everything. Okay, he'd walk around and they'd have like an outhouse, and he had a cane, and would push the door open and see that it hadn't been cleaned. And then he would criticize the devotees. Why had this not clean? What are you Brahmins or not? He knew everything. If there was a faucet and it dripped, he knew. Why is this dripping? So in India, Prabhupada was very, very keen to see every detail. He was very much involved in everything personal. Okay, and if you ever worked on a project in India, you had to mind your P's and Q's because Prabhupada knew everything about everything. Okay. So this is actually the situation there, and we see now in India that there's so many advances. What's the time now? Sorry? 7:30. Okay. So I think this is it. Okay, so just keep going. Okay. Okay. So anyways, the last time I was in Mayapur in 1990, and also Vrindavan, my wife and I went there. Things didn't work out how we planned, but now since that time, in another 30 years, they built so many buildings and much more comfortable and modern and everything. They have high-speed internet, regular power, things that were pretty much inconceivable in India at that time. When we were there, they didn't have the internet. to make a long distance call was, you had to go to an exchange, wait in line, you know. Hello, you could practically yell to America, hello, I'm from India. What did you telephone for? You just yell. So it's all been modernized due to the efforts of Bill Gates and others. But India has an eternal culture. This is the point. India is the land of Dharma. Okay, so nothing's really changed, even though the external appearance and so-called modern amenities. India is still the land of Dharma, where all the incarnations have appeared, all the great saints, all the great sages have appeared. If you have the eyes to see, it has a great treasure. Okay, and this is what Srila Prabhupada why he came to America. He didn't come here to beg. He came here to give this culture of ancient India, the Vedic culture. And every aspect of that Vedic culture he introduced. Now, because it was such a short time, Srila Prabhupada introduced things, it's like, how do you possibly bring the whole Vedic culture to a totally foreign land? Okay? And people who are not used to it. Okay? He came to teach no meat eating. No meat eating? No. No intoxication. Not even tea or coffee? Okay? No illicit sex. What? These things, no gambling. Okay? He said, I expected the Westerners to tell me to go home. Okay? So Srila Prabhupada came here to give us a message. And by Krishna's grace, I believe that all of the devotees who Srila Prabhupada met when he came were planted. They were put here by Krishna. Just the same way when Krishna appeared in Vrindavan, when he appeared 5,000 years ago, Krishna didn't just plop down, but all the demigods took birth in Vrindavan. So I believe also that many of the Prabhupada's earliest disciples, Prabhupada knew them from the previous time, and that Krishna had planted them there to help him with this Sankirtan movement, including the Beatles, George Harrison, the hippie movement, all these different things. What was it? Allen Ginsberg, other people. Everything was arranged by Krishna. They asked Prabhupada, why didn't you come earlier? And Prabhupada said, you weren't ready. Okay? So, Srila Prabhupada's appearance in America, okay, it was a grand plan. And now we, all of us here, and anyone who's listening, can be part of that plan. This is Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement. It's not up to us. We're not doing it. Lord Chaitanya is arranging everything. And just as Arjuna was fighting on behalf of Krishna, on one hand he thought, well, I'm fighting this to gain my rightful kingdom, but the fact is that Krishna had a greater plan. Okay, so we may have our lives, we may have things that we're obliged to do, we have a job. Maybe some of us are able to live in the ashram, but most of us are not. Okay, we have our duties. But the main thing is that we develop our Krishna consciousness. That's the main duty of human life. You may have opulence, you may not. You may have a beautiful wife or husband, or you may not. You may have all good fortune, you may have no fortune. But human life isn't meant to worry about those things. Okay? They come and go. Somebody, maybe the President of the United States, Mr. Kennedy, had everything. Beautiful wife, wonderful children, boom, dead in a heartbeat. Okay? At any time, anything can change. But bhakti, the path of bhakti is eternal. And whatever progress you make in human life guarantees you another human life. Otherwise, there's no guarantees. Okay? And if you make a little progress, then as a concession, if you don't complete it, then you can go to the heavenly planets and enjoy for some time. But in the heavenly planets, the effort for self-realization and austerity is really a back burner thing. Okay, if you're enjoying thousands of times more enjoyment than on Earth, can you imagine? You think you're going to go off to the Himalayas and meditate? Not likely. In the very highest regions, they're pure devotees, or almost pure devotees. But most of the time in heavenly planets, it's just party time, enjoying. So devotees don't want to go to heaven. Devotees want to serve Krishna. In fact, for a devotee, going to heaven is like going to hell. Because if there's no Krishna consciousness, what's the use of life? Okay. So this is what Srila Prabhupada brought to America. Something that most Americans couldn't even conceive of before he came. I'd never heard of Krishna before. I grew up in a white ghetto. We didn't have any Indian people in our community at all. We had no black students. We had one person that was half black. That was where I grew up. I didn't have any idea of any other culture, right, other than, McDonald's and, Jack in the Box and playing football and all these things, right? And all of a sudden, I joined the Hare Krishnas and wind up in India. And I get to meet someone on the level of Jesus Christ. How does that happen? I have no explanation. But somehow or other, Lord Chaitanya was the savior of the most fallen. Well, I throw my hat in the ring. I was pretty far down the barrel. But somehow or other, Srila Prabhupada picked me up. And here I am, 50 years later. I joined when I was 20. I'm almost 70. So that's about 50 years. And my greatest privilege is to speak on his behalf. There is no greater opportunity or privilege for me. And I'm just so thankful that I get this opportunity, that I had this chances to be with him when I went to India, and see how he talked, see how he preached to people. I saw him we were in the house of the richest family in India, the Birla family. Okay, it's like Rockefellers. Think Rockefeller family. Can you imagine? Imagine Jesus going to have lunch with the Rockefellers. It's like that. And Prabhupada was speaking to there were some girls there, some women there, perfect guest. Just small talk. He could talk on any subject. And just very friendly, very personal. But as soon as someone asked him a spiritual question, it was like, Clark Kent takes his suit and coat off and becomes Superman, and probably become guru. And he would preach very, very heavily. Like in America, fire and brimstone, these Christian preachers, the Prabhupada was like that in the Hindu tradition or Krishna consciousness. He would just absolutely fire and brimstone, and people just loved it. Because all the other swamis and gurus that they ever heard were simply mamby-pamby, I saw one, I'm you, you are me, all this nonsense, big words, and go out behind the stage and start smoking beedies and, doing all kinds of nonsense. When Prabhupada spoke, they knew he was speaking the truth, and they loved it. And after the lecture was over, we would have a big, think like circus tent. Most people never even seen our circus tent, okay? We're on this city block, right? There's Grand Avenue, and then there's another street over here, Hornbland, Cass Street, Dawes Street, okay, city block. Think of a tent that would take up this whole block, and how many people could fit in that tent. We had Pandal programs with 20,000 people. 20,000 people inside, okay? And Prabhupada would lecture. Okay, when we were in Bombay in 1973, the final night, place is absolutely packed. there were devotees on the stage. They did a little play. When the play was over, they started a kirtan. And Prabhupada leaped up on the stage and started dancing. The whole place, 20,000 people, leaped out of their seats and went crazy. Chanting and dancing and jumping up and down. It was like a bomb went off. It was unbelievable. Okay, I saw this with my own eyes. This is just the power of Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so we talk about Prabhupada in India. Yes, we had times with Prabhupada to be at the Rath Yatra, and but in India, when there's a sadhu and they have a program, it doesn't matter what kind of a nonsense he is. People want to hear something spiritual. They love it, they crave it, they live it. And when Prabhupada came, oh my goodness. Yes, he had some people who would protest or they'd challenge him or something like that. And Prabhupada would just completely dismiss them. And every night, same thing, we would have a Pandal program for a week at a time, week and a half. Every night, you could tell the same verses, because he was speaking either Bengali or Sanskrit, you could tell the verses he was saying. He would say the same thing, that you were born in India. It's your duty to support this Krishna consciousness. Make your life perfect, and then preach. Spread it to anyone that you know. Become a guru. That was his message, okay? And he wouldn't take any no for an answer. He would never back down or anything like that, okay? And here are my disciples. They're from the West. They're mad after Krishna. What about you? What are you doing? You're supposed, this is the land of, you're in the land of Dharma. What are you doing? Looking to the West? Some trinkets? Some technology or something like that? Okay? Don't throw away your culture. That was his message. And it would, every single night. And afterward, people would try to throw themselves at his feet, right? They want to go and touch Prabhupada's feet or whatever. That's what they do. Try to get some blessing or something. Okay. So this was Prabhupada. So I was there. I wouldn't do much, but I was there. I saw what Prabhupada was doing. Very, very, very powerful. Are we good? So thank you very much for the privilege of being able to speak on Srila Prabhupada's behalf.